It's crazy how I haven't been able to make a video in 3 days. Good deeds. Make an effort to introduce yourself to a neighbor who you haven't spoken to before. This is a very interesting note. Growing up, I had you could say, stable home, meaning that when I was born into my mom having a house, or rather, I should say, her finalizing us having a home began when I was super, super, super little. I was so little that I have no memory of living anywhere else except at that home. I know that she didn't own the home by the time I was born. It's more of maybe within the year, 2 years or so, that's when she got that one home. But it's pretty much the same thing. The amount of time is so insignificant that I might as well say I was born into this house. She knew the neighbors from across the street, from immediately next to her. And as a result, I was able to know them, at least know their names. And they had children. These kids were older than I was by a few years. It just became a whole lot easier to, I guess, bond with them because naturally we already had a bond to begin with. Now, when it comes to my neighbor across the street, this one was interesting because he wasn't as available, and I want to say it was because he might have been overprotected by his mom. He is around the same age as my brother. And I just remember that I thought he was my favorite neighbor, but to have him around was a little bit more of a treat. I think it's because his mom was more fixated on getting him prepared to go to specific schools, specific paths, you know what I mean? In other words, this was like a guy that, looking back, I think he was going to a private school, that type of thing. Anyway, I just remember that years later, I started seeing a smaller kid living with them, and it turns out that his mom had another kid, and that became, of course, his little brother. And that little brother was closer to me in age, but of course, I was still older. And I had the hardest time bonding with that kid because he had a special kind of annoyance going on with him. He was kind of loud and a little bit on the savage side, as in his conduct, his behavior. He was too hyper, didn't have any consideration for things, say, as opposed to holding something gently. He didn't have like a sense of grip, a sense of gentleness. And I was not really into that type of thing. Now, as time progressed, I want to say that during my childhood, that was the last time I had a genuine bond with a neighbor going on. I really don't remember many of my conversations with those neighbors as a kid. I just remember one time I was very rude to one of them. Of course, they didn't deserve it. They didn't do anything bad. They simply greeted me, and I just had like a really bad attitude for some reason. I just went like, haha, I'm not gonna talk to you. And of course, my mom made me say sorry. Eventually, she also tried to, I guess, patch things up on my behalf in a sense, but I just don't remember why I was feeling that way anyway. As an adult, I can tell you I haven't had an interaction with a neighbor since 2 years ago. And it was because at my old apartment, which is only a block away from here, technically we're still in the same block, the neighbor from across the street, I did talk to him. And of course, he was the one to take the initiative. It was super helpful to know him because he started sharing things about the history of this place a little bit. And he was asking me if I also received some notices about things changing. And I said, yeah, which is weird since we've been here for like 8 years now. Things like that. And another thing that happened that I will forever be grateful to him for is we had a relatively significant snowstorm some years ago. Mom was having trouble pulling into her parking spot. And we tried the tricks that we used to try in the past, and none of that was working. He already was outside with his shovel, shoveling the driveway, and he came over without us asking and helped us out with that. But outside of that, it's not like I really got to know him any deeper. I know they have a daughter. He lives with his wife. They have a daughter who I would see here and there. I want to say she was in college for a time. And then after that, when I moved out here, I'll see him from a distance sometimes, but it's not like I've been able to really talk to him much. And nobody who stays now at my old place seems to stay, so I doubt that he has been able to really connect with any of them. But it's just crazy to me that I grew up thinking that relationship with neighbors was an inherent thing. And if this note isn't a card, it means that we are aware that we just don't bond with neighbors, perhaps like we once did. Maybe back in the good old days, it truly was a necessity to get to know your neighbors. And I also think that knowing your neighbors could also provide a sense of security, if you ask me, because if something happens at your home, the neighbor can be like, yeah, I saw this, I saw that, I saw them, I don't know who they are. Or if something happens, say, let's say I go missing, the neighbors know what I look like. They can be like, oh yeah, something seemed weird about this car that pulled up that we had never seen before. And some person stepped out and she got in it and she didn't look very happy. Something like that. Those little details, I would imagine, is what helps resolve cases of things happening to people or things happening to people's property. But nowadays, for me, neighbors just don't seem available. And the reason I say that is because I rarely see them. The only time I may see them is if they're using the patch of grass that's right next to me to have their dogs perform their business, and anytime they're taking out trash. But right now, if I were to peek out the window, there is not a soul to be seen. I may see someone walking a dog or someone jogging, something like that. But outside of that, my immediate neighbors, I want to say in a day, collectively, I may see maybe 30 seconds of human activity out here, meaning one neighbor takes out the trash. If I were to observe them, their act lasts maybe 10 seconds. Then the next person comes over, the next person, the next person. It's just seconds. It's one of those things that I personally, myself, tend to have a little bit of a time constraint. When I spot them, it's usually on the evenings as I'm getting ready to go out anyway. And it's one of those things that I'm on the go, I'm moving around, getting things done. Therefore, it's just never a very good time to attempt to initiate any kind of social activity. And I guess it also doesn't help that naturally I just prefer not having that many interactions anyway, because I work retail. You guys know that shit drains me because it's too social for me. But it's one of those things that I just never thought that I was going on to, like, how many years has it been? It's certainly been over 15 years since I had a relationship with a neighbor. And eventually, some of the places I started living at, some of the neighbors in my book were questionable. Some neighbors smoke. It's one of those things that I just cannot hang out with. Other people also have drinking habits. I'm also not wowed about that. So even if I wanted to bond with some of these folks, being in their presence is a detriment to me. And it's one of those things that I just have to consider. I just have to be careful. I don't have to linger in an environment that is legit not good for me. At least I can say that the smoking habits have been on the decline, because a lot of people who live close to here, it seems like younger people nowadays may not find that as cool as before. Maybe some people take the risks more seriously. And I can say that, sure, young people are still users of that type of thing, right? But at least I can say that compared to years prior, when I felt like every time I would be walking down a sidewalk, there was like a smoke cloud somewhere. I can say that has greatly diminished. And overall, I feel like it's more enjoyable to be outside more. But yeah, you guys, I'm curious to know about you guys. Do you happen to have a good relationship with a neighbor? My boyfriend, definitely. He is super social. He has told me stories about his former neighbors and how he got to know some of their names and talk to some of them. In some cases, he helped move things around for some of them. He had a story to tell out of all of them. But the way his building was set up is the kind of building where you have a hallway with stairs, and then, say, the bottom of the stairs, to the right, there's a door, to the left, there's a door. Those are two living spaces. You go up the stairs, and then at the end of the hall, there are like two apartments, and then mid hall, at the top of the stairs, there's someone living to the left, someone living to the right. You will hear noises. You will hear noises from downstairs, from right next to you, right across from you. And I feel like auditorily he had more stories to tell than I do. I happen to be in a corner, thank God. I don't have to potentially experience noise from both sides or noise from one side, anything like that. I only hear noise from one side. But outside of that, there's nothing really going on for me, and I like that. I truly like that. I truly prefer that. But if you guys have any neighbor stories, any neighbors that you became tight with, or overall the neighbor dynamic and how it has evolved over the years, and how maybe neighborly relationships have been on the decline to the point that you don't even get to know their names anymore, yeah, share those. I can tell you that I have known more about former residents more than current residents, because I still get some of their mail and I get to see what kind of things they were signed up to. Like, I know which college they were going to, I know which perhaps bank they had, things like that. And I'm like, y'all need to make sure that you change your addresses for everything. College, I can understand. If you're graduated, what the fuck do you care? Why should you care if you're holding your degree already? But that type of thing, I always write on the envelope, no longer a resident, please return to sender, something like that. Maybe they'll eventually find them. Well, there you guys have it. That's it for me. Thank you so much for tuning in. Let me know your thoughts on this one, and I'll see you soon.